disappeared on her way home. Hours later, police found a note and a chilling sound from underground. No one believed she could still be alive. But when rescuers began to dig, what they uncovered left the world speechless. This is not fiction. This happened. In 1968, it was a quiet afternoon in August 1968, when the small town of Glendale, California, seemed wrapped in its usual suburban calm. Children played in the yards, sprinklers hissed, and the sound of a distant radio hummed through the warm air. But inside one peaceful home, something unimaginable was about to unfold. Kim Baird was only 20 years old, a college student, full of plans, laughter, and dreams. Her family described her as the kind of girl who smiled even when things went wrong. That day, she was home alone, waiting for her parents to return from a weekend trip. The doorbell rang once, twice, and then came a knock that felt strangely deliberate, slow and heavy. When she opened the door, two men stood before her, dressed neatly, wearing calm smiles that didn't reach their eyes. One of them introduced himself as a delivery man. "Package for your father," he said. But before Kim could even reply, a cloth pressed against her face. The smell was sharp chemical, and then everything went black. Hours later, Kim woke up in complete darkness. The air was heavy and stale, pressing against her lungs. Her hands were bound, and her heartbeat thundered in her ears. When she tried to move, she realized she wasn't lying on a bed. The walls were close. Too close. Cold wood surrounded her. Above her, she felt the vibration of nails hammered shut. Panic gripped her chest as realization dawned. She was inside a coffin, buried. Outside, the kidnappers drove away, leaving her entombed in a shallow grave beneath the California dirt. In their van, a small device clicked, a crude air pipe, meant to keep her alive just long enough for ransom to be demanded. But in their rush, they hadn't noticed the pipe was already bending, collapsing under the soil. Back at home, Kim's parents returned to an empty house, her purse on the table, the door slightly open. Moments later, the phone rang. A voice, calm and almost polite, said, "If you ever want to see your daughter alive again, don't call the police." Then the line went dead. The next 48 hours would become one of the most terrifying manhunts in California's history. But deep underground, Kim's breath was growing weaker, and her time was running out. Beneath the earth, time dissolved into silence. Kim Baird could barely breathe. Every gasp drew in the scent of wood, soil, and her own fear. She tried to move, but the box was too small. Her knees pressed against her chest, her wrists burned against the ropes. She screamed, but the sound died instantly in the dirt above. Her mind began to race. Was this how she would die? Buried alive? Forgotten before the ransom was even paid. Tears streamed down her face as she tried to recall every noise, every word the kidnappers had said. But only one detail echoed in her head. One man had called the other Frank. Meanwhile, above ground, Kim's parents were living their worst nightmare. The police had been secretly alerted despite the kidnappers' warning. The FBI joined the case within hours, tracing phone calls and interviewing neighbors. The kidnappers had demanded $25,000 in unmarked bills, a small fortune at the time, and strict instructions: no police, no tricks. Special Agent Robert Taylor led the investigation. He'd seen countless abduction cases before, but this one felt different, too quiet, too calculated. The kidnappers had given no proof Kim was alive, only their word. Still, her father insisted on preparing the ransom, hoping they'd at least keep her breathing long enough to negotiate. Back in the coffin, Kim fought to stay conscious. Her breathing grew shallow. Dirt trickled down through tiny cracks. She realized the air pipe, her only lifeline, was clogging. The faint hiss that had been whispering above her stopped completely. Panic turned to desperation. With what little strength she had left, she began pounding the lid, over and over, splinters driving into her knuckles. Hours passed. Above ground, the kidnappers had parked their van in a remote orchard, arguing about what to do next. One of them, younger and visibly shaking, began to panic. "We shouldn't have left her there that long," he muttered. "We need to check." But the other, colder, sharper, silenced him. "We'll move only after the call. Don't lose your nerve." As the night deepened, a break came from an unexpected place. A truck driver had reported seeing a black van parked, strangely along a rural road near Los Angeles. The police, now working quietly undercover, traced the plate number from his vague memory. Within hours, agents were closing in. But down below, Kim's vision blurred. Her fists had gone numb. She whispered weakly, "Please, I don't want to die here." And then, faintly, she thought she heard something. Footsteps? Distant voices? Or maybe it was her mind slipping away into darkness. The soil above her shifted. Something was happening. The early morning air was heavy with fog as FBI agents quietly gathered near the orchard. They had traced the van to an abandoned farmhouse outside Los Angeles, a place no one had lived in for years. Agent Robert Taylor gave the silent order, "No lights. No sound, we move in pairs." The men surrounded the property. The black van sat motionless, dew glistening on its surface. Taylor peered inside, ropes, a shovel, and empty gas cans. His pulse quickened. "She's buried nearby," he whispered. The ground was soft from recent digging. Somewhere under their feet, a young woman was running out of air. Meanwhile, deep below, Kim's world was collapsing into blackness. Her lungs burned, her heart barely beating. The air had turned stale. She couldn't tell if she was awake or dreaming. She thought she heard her mother's voice calling her name, but when she opened her mouth to answer, no sound came out, only dust. Above ground, one of the agents found something, a disturbed patch of earth, too rectangular to be natural. "Here," he called softly. They began to dig with their hands first, careful not to crush the box beneath. Each scoop of dirt felt like a race against time. Suddenly, one of the kidnappers, Frank, emerged from the trees, startled by the noise. He froze when he saw the agents, dropped his pistol, and tried to run. Two agents tackled him instantly. "Where is she buried?" Taylor shouted. Frank hesitated for a heartbeat, then gasped, "You're standing on her." The agents dug faster now. Their hands were raw, their arms shaking. The wooden lid appeared. Taylor knelt, his voice trembling. Kim, can you hear me?" There was no answer. He pried open the lid, and for a second, everyone froze. Inside, Kim's body lay motionless. Her skin was pale, her hair coated in dust. But then, a tiny, almost invisible movement. Her fingers twitched. "She's alive!" Someone shouted. The agents tore away the rest of the earth, pulling her free. Taylor wrapped his jacket around her and carried her out, whispering, "You're safe now. You're safe." Her eyelids fluttered. She took one weak breath and whispered a single word, "Home," before collapsing into his arms. As sirens approached from the distance, the morning sun began to rise. The same sun that had set on her grave hours ago now warmed her face. Frank was in custody. The other kidnapper soon caught on a nearby highway. The rescue made national headlines. "Buried alive girl saved by FBI." Newspapers screamed the next day. Kim would spend months recovering, not just from the physical scars, but from the memories buried in that dark box. For years after, she never spoke publicly about the kidnapping. But those who met her said that every time she saw sunlight breaking through trees, she smiled, a small reminder that life, no matter how deeply buried, can still find a way back to the surface. The hospital room was silent except for the slow beeping of the heart monitor. Kim Baird lay beneath white sheets, her face pale but peaceful. The doctors called it a miracle. Her oxygen levels had dropped dangerously low, and yet, somehow she had survived. Her parents stood by her side, trembling, unable to decide whether to weep or smile. Outside her room, Agent Robert Taylor spoke to the reporters waiting in the corridor. "She was buried for more than 4 hours," he said quietly. "If we'd been 5 minutes later..." He didn't finish the sentence. The words hung in the air, unfinished, like the nightmare they all wanted to forget. But the nightmare wasn't over. Frank, the captured kidnapper, began to talk. He confessed that he and his partner, George, had planned the abduction for months. "She was just supposed to be ransom," he muttered during questioning. "We didn't mean to kill her." When the agents pressed him, Frank admitted that he had panicked when the ransom call went wrong. "We buried her alive because we thought it'd buy us time." The confession sent chills through the courtroom later that year. The press called it the Coffin case. The public was horrified. Parents began locking their doors earlier. Children were told never to speak to strangers. The story had struck a deep nerve in a nation already uneasy after years of social unrest and war. Meanwhile, Kim began to recover, physically at least. But at night, she woke screaming. The walls of her room felt too close. The faint hum of the ventilator reminded her of the air inside the box. Sometimes she asked the nurses to keep the window open, even in winter. "I need to breathe," she would whisper. Her mother tried to read to her, tell her it was over. But Kim couldn't escape the darkness that still followed her. The doctors called it trauma. To her, it felt like being buried again, but this time inside her own mind. Months passed. One afternoon, as the spring sun filled the hospital courtyard, a nurse rolled Kim's wheelchair outside. The air smelled of grass and rain. For the first time, she didn't flinch when the wind touched her face. She closed her eyes, tilted her head toward the sky, and whispered, "I'm still here." That whisper became a turning point. Slowly, she began to rebuild her life. The FBI visited one last time, offering counseling and protection. Reporters begged for interviews, but she refused them all. "My story isn't about fear," she told one nurse. "It's about breathing again." Years later, when asked how she found the strength to survive, Kim said something simple, but unforgettable. "When you have no air left, you start to remember why you want to live." Her words became a message of hope for victims across America, proof that even after being buried alive, the will to survive can outshine death itself. The courtroom was packed. Every seat was filled, every corridor lined with faces waiting to hear what kind of men could bury a girl alive. The flash of cameras flooded the room as the two kidnappers, Frank McAllister and George Lane, were brought in, their wrists in chains, their eyes downcast. Kim's parents sat quietly in the front row. Her father's hands were clenched, trembling slightly, while her mother held a small silver cross between her fingers. When Frank finally took the stand, the room fell silent. His voice was low, shaking. "I didn't mean to hurt her," he said. "We just wanted money. We thought we had everything under control." The prosecutor's voice cut through the air. "You buried a 13-year-old girl alive," he said. "You nailed her inside a box, left her in the ground, and walked away. You call that control?" Frank had no answer. His eyes filled with tears, but the courtroom remained cold, unfeeling. It wasn't remorse people wanted, it was justice. Outside, the world was obsessed with the case. Newspapers across America printed every new detail. Headlines screamed, "The Coffin Girl Lives! Kidnappers face death penalty." Reporters camped outside the courthouse, and radio stations played the story on repeat. During the verdict, the judge's voice echoed through the chamber. For the crime of kidnapping, conspiracy, and attempted murder, Frank McAllister and George Lane are sentenced to life imprisonment. A gasp rippled through the crowd. The Bairds didn't cheer, they simply held each other and wept. Justice had come, but peace was still far away. Kim was not in the courtroom. She had chosen not to attend. "I don't want to see their faces," she told her mother. "They already took enough of me." That night, as the story played across every TV channel, Kim sat by her window, watching the stars. She still carried nightmares, flashes of darkness, the sound of dirt hitting the wooden lid above her head. But now, she also carried something else light. In the years that followed, Kim tried to live quietly. She avoided interviews, though journalists never stopped asking. She studied psychology, perhaps searching for answers to her own scars. Later, she began volunteering with trauma survivors, especially children who had lived through violence or loss. People who met her said she had an extraordinary calm about her. When one reporter asked what she learned from that horrible experience, she smiled faintly and said, "When you've already been to the edge of death, everything after feels like borrowed time. You either hide from it or you use it." By the 1980s, Kim's story had inspired documentaries, books, and even a film adaptation. But she never watched them. For her, the real story was not about fear, or crime, or even survival. It was about the strange, stubborn will of life itself. Years passed, and time began to soften the sharp edges of Kim Baird's story, but it never truly faded. The people who had followed the case never forgot the image of that little girl, buried alive in the darkness, fighting to breathe, praying someone would find her. Kim grew into a quiet, determined woman. She never sought fame or attention, yet her survival inspired many. By the 1990s, schools and organizations often invited her to speak about hope, trauma, and survival, though she rarely accepted. "I'm not a symbol," she once said softly. "I'm just someone who got a second chance." But even as she lived a simple life, her experience continued to echo across generations. Police academies studied her case as an example of rapid response and rescue timing. Psychologists referenced her recovery as a remarkable case of resilience. For Kim, though, it wasn't about the headlines or studies. It was about gratitude. In an old interview, one of the very few she ever gave, she said, "Many said her story helped them believe in life again." Kim would read every single one and reply with a short, handwritten note, "You're stronger than you think." In her later years, she chose to live away from cities, near a quiet countryside, home surrounded by woods. A strange but fitting choice for someone who once fought to escape from beneath the earth. She would walk among the trees every morning, listening to the sounds of birds, the rustle of leaves, the rhythm of the world still turning. Neighbors described her as gentle and private, always smiling, often lost in thought. She planted flowers, Lily, her favorite, and sometimes children from nearby farms would visit her just to hear the story. She never told it the same way twice. Sometimes she would just say, "There was darkness, and then there was light." When Kim passed away peacefully in her sleep at the age of 72, the story resurfaced across newspapers once more. Old black and white photos appeared again, the young girl, the coffin, the rescue. But now, the headlines were softer. The girl who refused to die, a life of quiet strength. Her coffin, the same one police had kept for evidence, was never displayed in any museum, though many offered. Her family insisted it be destroyed. "Let the darkness die with it," they said. In the end, Kim's legacy wasn't about the horror of what happened underground. It was about what came after. The way she chose peace over fear. The way she transformed pain into quiet strength. And perhaps, more than anything, it was the reminder she left for the world that even in the coldest, darkest places, the will to live can still burn bright.
Thanks you for watch. Every old story holds a lesson worth remembering. If you enjoyed this one, subscribe for watch and listen more old times, real stories, and don't forget,